But anyway, good morning, everybody. This is our October California 4-H Association webinar. Our guest speaker today is Brandon Louie. He's going to be talking about the putting youth on the map, incorporating maps and data into the 4-H programs. He is, well, I'll let you introduce yourself, Brandon. It's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Charles. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. It's really a pleasure to be able to speak to you about the work that we've been doing and look for some opportunities to maybe collaborate further with 4-H youth development programming. So my name is Brandon Louie. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator with the UC Davis Center for Regional Change. And I've been working with the center now for the past year. Previous to this work, I was a community development graduate student here at UC Davis. I did my work actually looking at youth-led participatory action research and supported a group of youth health promoters in the nearby city of West Sacramento. Before that, I was a history major and theater minor at UC Berkeley. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nicaragua, where I worked as well with a number of youth in the community on agriculture-related projects. And I also was a community organizer with farm worker youth here in California and in affordable housing complexes as well. So I have over 10 years of experience in community development work, and a lot of that has been working with youth. So I'm really excited to be here connecting with you all and talking a bit about the work that we've been doing here at the UC Davis Center for Regional Change. So looking at the agenda for this morning, I'll just give you a brief introduction about what we do here at the center and how our work is related to the work that 4-H is doing with young people across the state. We'll talk a little bit about youth development and maps and data and why I'm here in the first place, what are the connections and intersections and possibilities for further collaboration along these lines. And then I'll introduce you to a couple things that we have here at the center, one of which is a training curriculum that helps train adults and youth on how to use data and maps and incorporate them into their own community advocacy activities. And the other are two mapping tools that we've created online in order to help provide greater access to publicly available data to youth and adults. So we'll look at those. I'll also do an online site demonstration so you actually see what they look like. We'll talk about a few success stories of how youth have been using them around the state, and then we'll open it up for questions and answer at the end. So just a little bit more about the UC Davis Center for Regional Change. We're here on campus, and we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary with a big party last night, so we're very excited that we've been around for a full decade doing this work. And we are a catalyst for innovative, collaborative, and action-oriented research. So we look to bring together faculty and students from different disciplines here on campus, but we also look to build bridges between the university and community groups and others in policy, advocacy, business, philanthropy, etc. And in particular, my work here over the past year has been working on campus and around the state with UC CalFresh. So I've been supporting their county staff in their youth engagement work, in particular working on policy systems and environmental change intervention strategies focused on young people in nutrition, food access, and physical activity. And with this youth engagement initiative, UC CalFresh is really looking to move from just serving youth to engaging youth. And they have also been working in policy systems and environmental change work because of recent requirements through SNAP-Ed. So moving from just direct nutrition education to really looking at how do we change the environments in which youth are trying to make the healthy choice the right choice, and how do we support them in that, and recognizing that, you know, if we're going to be making important decisions about youth lives and that impact them, they really should be at the table. They should be the ones who are planning, implementing, and evaluating those changes themselves. So with UC CalFresh, we've really been working in some of their counties to try and push this work forward. And it's been really exciting. It's been exciting to learn about the work that Charles was doing in Contra Costa County with the 4H2O group. And that's definitely in line with the type of work that we've been trying to promote with youth programs through UC CalFresh as well. So that's kind of the connection, and certainly working closely with 4-H as well, and the Public Health Institute Center for Wellness and Nutrition on this work. So we've had a lot of collaboration, and we're definitely looking to expand and partner more with 4-H moving forward. So it's really great to be here talking to you all and exploring some more possibilities for collaboration. And for the center, for us, it's really important to look at community and regional development from a comprehensive, holistic approach. So it's really about recognizing that all of these issues are interconnected. And it's also about trying to maintain social equity at the core of all the work that we do. So this is really the focus that we try to bring to the work that we're doing with youth. And in particular, when we think about youth work as well, it also is really about recognizing that those issues are all interconnected, right? That young people don't just experience an issue with their family at home and then go to school and experience a school issue and then maybe go to work and experience an employment issue, right? All those things are interconnected. All of them can feed on one another, and all of them can have cumulative impacts on our young people. So when we think about measuring and promoting youth well-being, one of the things that we're really trying to do is break down some of those silos, try and look holistically as well at youth wellness. But it's also important to recognize that, a lot of times assessments of young people really come from a deficit perspective, right? So it's important to think about how we can employ positive indicators of youth development, and looking at well-being as more than just the absence of negatives and the prevention of problems. So it's really about recognizing positive assets and protective factors as well. So we really look to engage with young people as key local assets, integral components of successful community development and social change, rather than simply as suspects or victims or consumers, which I know certainly falls in line with the 4-H view of young people as well. So we definitely promote that sense of them also as really being integral actors in our community and in our community development efforts. So when we think about youth development and maps and data, and why am I talking to you all here this morning? What are the connections, right? So we really see a lot of ways that maps and data can support youth development efforts. As mentioned here, making publicly available data visible and more accessible is really important. There is a lot of information that's out there, and certainly, as we know, the amount of information and technology to access information has really grown exponentially. And youth-led activities and service learning and community advocacy efforts have also grown, but building a bridge between those two where youth civic actors can have important data and mapping tools that can enhance their work, that's a bridge that it really hasn't been solidified, and that's something that we're really trying to improve upon. Maps and data can really help amplify youth voices and experiences. So when you can take their own personal testimonies, combine it with research they may conduct, and then combine that with quote-unquote official data and narratives that exist about their community, that can really help build strong arguments for change. Supporting youth representation and leadership. So when young people are acting as leaders in their community, essentially they're representing large bodies of other young people, right? But what does it mean for them to represent folks when they may not have a clear understanding of experiences of other youth beyond their immediate friend group and their family group, maybe their school? But how do you represent an entire school district? How do you represent the city? And how do you find out about other experiences that happen to young people within that area to kind of speak more authoritatively about trends that are going on? So that's where it can really help support that. Definitely enhancing youth skills, so learning about data and mapping and how to manipulate them and use them, using statistics certainly helps with critical geographic data literacy, with civic engagement efforts, definitely with STEM when it comes to mathematics and technology. So there's a lot of connections there, and really supporting evidence-based service learning and advocacy. So certainly a lot of connections to many of the things that 4-H is engaged in. And in particular, we really are working on those advocacy service learning areas. So when youth are doing assessments of their community, when they're trying to identify issues that are interesting to them, that are important in their community, when they're trying to build a case around what's happening in their community and how best to address it, these are all areas where data and mapping can really come in handy and be really important and enhance the work that they're doing. And in particular with the UC CalFresh work, we've been doing youth-led participatory action research. So again, similar to what Charles was doing in Contra Costa County, where young people are really allowed to identify study and address social issues that impact them. It's meant to be a very process-oriented and reflexive approach to research and activism. And within that framework, maps and data can be extremely helpful, again, helping them refine and identify questions and issues, help them practice ground truthing, which is essentially when you take the quote-unquote official data, but then you look at what's really happening on the ground and see, you know, are there gaps in the official data? How does this match up with my own experience and what's really happening in my community? Their maps and data can be really helpful for getting the word out about what you're doing and about what's happening in a community, and also for gauging impacts over time. So these are all intersections where, you know, I think data and mapping can really support and enhance the work that 4-H is doing with their youth. And so, as I was mentioning, when you think about building a compelling argument for change, if you're doing service learning or advocacy work or YPAR, we really think about some key components that make for especially compelling arguments. And as I mentioned, the basis of that is really youth personal stories and experience. But building on that, youth being able to conduct their own research really helps to enhance their own personal stories and experience. And then if you can also build upon that with publicly available data, either through the sites that we've created or other sites and resources that are available, all those things together make for an extremely compelling argument for change that young people want to see in their community. And just examples of what that might look like, you know, their own personal stories and experience may be highlighted through a map that they draw themselves, right? For example, maybe they're drawing their neighborhood and highlighting areas where they can, where they have access to physical activity opportunities and access where they don't, or where they don't have access. Then they could combine that maybe with, say, a photo voice research project. So perhaps they go out into the community, as is seen here in a project that was done by youth in West Sacramento, take photos of parts of their neighborhood, again, that they'd identified that either provide access to or are barriers to physical activity. Then they can use Google Maps to actually map those onto a publicly available map, insert photos, videos, and written testimony into each of those points and make that like a publicly available resource for folks about youth voice and what they've noticed about the research in their community. And then if you can combine that with some data that's already available, for instance, from our mapping tools, maybe looking at physical fitness levels in the high school for males and females, and then maybe looking at other data that's available, for instance, looking at overweight or obesity rates by the county and by the school district, you can see now how combining all of these elements together can really paint a holistic picture of what's happening. And when youth are, say, presenting this to a school board, presenting this to their peers, doing social media campaigns, this can really be compelling information and can help push for the changes that they want to see happen in their communities. So recognizing that none of that work is easy or comes naturally to folks, you know, we really wanted to make sure that we could help build the capacity of youth and the adults that support them to be able to effectively utilize maps and data and the tools that we've created. So in order to do that, we created a curriculum. So this is available online through our website for free, publicly available. You can see the URL there at the bottom. And for us, you know, it was really important to recognize that in order to have youth develop some ownership over data and mapping use, it really takes devoting some time and commitment to training them, getting them comfortable with it, right? We don't want to ever put young people into situations where they're not prepared without the proper supports. And so that's where having a suite of modules that are adaptable to many different situations and can be used either as full modules, or you can just pull specific activities out to insert into other meetings and trainings that you're doing. This helps start to build the capacity of young people to understand the importance of data and mapping and how they've been used both historically and presently in their communities to both empower and disempower segments of the community. Then also learning about how they can utilize mapping tools in their communities to actually push for changes that they want to see, right? So it's aimed both at youth and at adults. It's meant to be really customizable to your situations. And this is essentially the kind of the tools and activities that we're using when we're training our advocates and those who work with youth around the state. So again, with UC CalFresh, you know, helping them with these activities, building their capacity to bring this back to their youth group and be able to incorporate this into the work that they're doing, right? So when we think about, you know, what are some of the lessons that we talk about and how do you start to highlight what's happening in our communities and how maps and data have been used. Just a couple of quick examples that I want to share that we use in the curriculum. For instance, I don't know how many folks are familiar with this map or have seen a map like this. This one is of the city of Sacramento. It's actually from the early 20th century, around the 1930s, and it's a map of redlining. So if folks are or not familiar with the practice of redlining, essentially from the 30s through the 60s, this was a practice that really dictated how community neighborhoods were supported and how they developed. In particular, areas were assessed and graded based on a number of factors, not only the quality of infrastructure and amenities that existed there, but also the types of people that lived there. And in particular, low-income people of color were often the designating factor to determine that a place would be redlined, meaning that it was of the lowest quality and was of the highest risk for investment. If communities were redlined, that meant that they did not have access to credit, right? They could not get any credit either to buy a home or fix up their homes. And then that combined with the, essentially areas deemed as the most worthy of investment, the best places to live, they also often had racially restrictive covenants which did not allow homeowners to sell to people of color. This essentially meant that certain communities were boxed into certain areas and they were cut off from resources. And we see the effects of this to this day, right? That a lot of times when we think about the neighborhoods in our community that we know of that are low resourced, that often have the highest level of low income people of color, those were often the areas that were redlined, close to 100 years ago. And they're still being impacted today. When we looked at the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, many of those communities were the same neighborhoods that were also hit the hardest by subprime mortgages and then by foreclosures. So you see these patterns, and data and maps had a hand in creating these situations. And for young people, it's often an aha moment when a lot of times they're just used to their community being the way it is, and there's a sense that, well, we can't change it, that's how it's always been. But when they start to learn about ways that communities have actually been designed to be the way that they are through policy decisions, they also start to realize that those things can be undone, those things can be changed through their own activism and efforts. So just another quick example of what that can look like is with unincorporated communities. So this is another area where maps and data play a really key role in determining people's experiences, their access to resources, and what essentially opportunities may be available to them. So unincorporated communities are places that sit outside of municipal boundaries, right? So that means that the city does not provide any services to these areas. It's essentially up to the county to provide them with services. So what does that mean? Well, some very common city services that we often take for granted are things like access to water, to sewage, to sidewalks, to lighting, right? So when you don't have access to a lot of these things, this can lead to a lot of issues in communities, certainly health issues. And it's not to say that all unincorporated communities are low income. There are often unincorporated communities full of very wealthy individuals who don't have a need for city services because they can access whatever they need and have the resources and the wealth to be able to do whatever they have to do for themselves. But for those low income communities, often full of people of color, a lot of things can happen when you don't have any municipal representation. For instance, the city may decide that rather than putting this dumping site in my district where my constituents are going to get mad at me, I can just use our sphere of influence as a city to go put it out in an unincorporated area, right? Those people don't have much political power, they're not going to say anything, and they don't have any representation by the city, so we'll just put it out there, it's not going to be a problem, and everything's fine. Well, that leads to a lot of environmental hazards and issues for people living in unincorporated communities. So this is just another area where, invisible lines have been drawn often through areas. When you look at the Sacramento map, a lot of the areas that are cut out from the city are still fully residential, and there's no division necessarily in the community. It just happens to be one side of the street to the other, right? And that can really determine a lot of the opportunities and resources you have available to you. So again, just an example of how mapping and data can be really powerful and the types of things we try to instill in youth when they think about how their communities have been formed, and also what are avenues that they can get involved in their communities to try and improve them for the better. So one way that we try to help them do this is, again, by providing access to publicly available data sources. And here at the Center for Regional Change, we've created 2 different mapping tools, and these will be the tools that I'll show you today. So the Regional Opportunity Index on the top, and then putting youth on the map on the bottom. And to take a look at what those different mapping tools have available to them. So for the Regional Opportunity Index, we're looking at maps at the census tract level that are assessing indicators in a number of areas. So we're looking at education, economics, health, housing, transportation, mobility, and civic participation. We've got analyses by people in place, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then you can also customize your own reports based on different geographical boundaries. For putting youth on the map, this is looking specifically at youth wellness and youth vulnerability. So we have analyses also by race, ethnicity, and sex, so you can get even deeper to see who's being affected by certain issues. And we also have the curriculum there that we've developed with modules to help train youth and adults. And in both of these sites, we have sharing options, so you can print the maps, you can share them via social media, you can download all of the data yourself. So again, these maps are really helpful for folks like myself who aren't necessarily data inclined. And so if numbers are something that scare you, visualizations can really help break down those barriers and help give an introduction into what's happening in a community and what kind of statistics are available. So, but for folks who do love the data and want to use it, manipulate it themselves, you can download all of the data sets that we've utilized and put them into your own mapping tools. So to look at what types of data sources we're using, again, as I mentioned, they're all publicly available data sources. So as you can see, we're using census data, American Community Surveys data, Department of Public Health, the Healthy Kids Survey, Department of Education, so a number of sources. But just because this data is publicly available doesn't mean that people know where to access it, how to make sense of it, or even how to use it effectively, right? So it's out there, but does that mean people can really use it? Generally, no. So that's where we've come in. We've worked to clean up the data. We've worked to make sure that the data can speak to one another so that we can make some important comparisons in our communities. And we're not trying to be a data warehouse, right? So there's obviously tons of data that's out there, but we really try to have a curated set of indicators that we think are really key to understanding opportunity and youth wellness, and where other people are doing other work that's really impactful and have other data sets, we link to them on our website. So there's tons of other tools and resources that are available, but we certainly see ours as being an important one as well. And the way that we have designed our tools is by using indices. So they're analytical indices. Sometimes folks don't know what an index is, and so a really helpful way to think about that is just to think about essentially your report card. So you've got your GPA, that is your overall score, right? And you can know overall how you did throughout school. You can also compare that to other students, right? So that's essentially like your overall index score. But a GPA is made up of a lot of other scores and indicators, right? So for instance, all of your class grades. So class grades, when put together, make up your GPA score. So you can look at your overall score, but you can also look individually with every class. How did I do in each class? And then within your classes, right, you can also break that down even further. How did you do on homework assignments, on tests, on attendance, participation? So, essentially our indices are developed in the same way. You can look at the overall score and compare across census tracts or school districts or counties, but you can also break that down into its components at the domain level and even further at the indicator level. So to see what that looks like, the Youth Wellbeing Index as an example, you can get the overall index score, which is on the left, which is out of 100, but you can also look within that to look at individual domains of health, social relationships, community involvement, or education. And then within each of those, you can look even further at, for instance, physical fitness or how safe youth feel in their community or in their school, the levels of participation in their community. So you can look at the overall score, you can break it down even further. The same thing goes for the Regional Opportunity Index maps. And here we break it down a little differently. As you can see, we break it down either by people on the left or place on the right. And the way this works is, we're essentially analyzing what are the resources and opportunities that people possess or have access to, and how do you compare that to the resources that a place provides, right? And this can lead to some really helpful analysis when you think about areas where people have very few resources, and yet the place has a lot of resources to offer. Why is there a disconnect? How come people are not connected with the things that their place has available to them? Or places where people and place both have very low resources. Clearly, those are places that really deserve the most attention, need the most policy interventions and support, right? And so looking at what that looks like, when you think about education, for instance, on the people side, that could be, for instance, the English language proficiency or math proficiency that students in the 4th grade have. But looking on the place side, what does the place provide? That could be the high school graduation rate. That could be the percentage of high school graduates who are prepared to go to a UC or CSU. That could be the high school suspension and expulsion rate. So when you look at those things in combination, you can really start to pull out what's happening in a community and what are the types of issues that deserve the most attention and the types of resources and interventions that might provide the best solutions. So I know that's a lot of information to throw at everyone, and I think, again, the best way to really understand what we're talking about is to just get onto the sites themselves, take a look at how they function and what you can find out there. So what I'm going to do now is just share my screen again, but take a look at our website, which should be coming up now. Okay. So hopefully now everyone can see the Regional Opportunity Index homepage. So when you show up, everything on the left-hand side, the Learn About side, is essentially where we have our resources. So you can find links to other tools and sites. You can find all of the data information either to download or just the explanations of how we found it and calculated it. You can see success stories and other resources that we have available. And then the right-hand side will take you right to the mapping tool. So when I click on that, this is essentially what's going to pop up. You're going to get this little dialog box just telling you about the basic functionality for zooming in and out and finding locations. You can just close that out. And then you have a 3-panel mapping system basically at your disposal. The defaults are, you can see the title of the maps here in these top boxes. So we have the Regional Opportunity Index for people on the left. We've got the Regional Opportunity Index for place in the center. And then on the right-hand side now we have the population density. But you can change all these maps to be whatever you like from our different categories. So you can make them, you can essentially manipulate it to serve whatever needs you have when you're doing your assessments or your work. They basically operate similar to like a Google map. So if you just click and drag, you can move around on the maps. If you double click, you can zoom in. There's also zoom in and zoom out buttons here at the top of each map. And if you ever get lost too far, you can just hit the California button and that'll zoom you all the way back out. As you see, when I'm moving the maps, they all tend to move in sync. You can change that if you like. So you could have them either continue to move together, but be able to have them at different scales for your analysis, or you could actually take that off as well, and so you can maneuver the locations independently of one another. So you could either be looking at the same county at the same scale, or maybe you want to look at 2 different neighborhoods, 2 different counties, 2 different cities. You can manipulate that however you like, but I'll just take those back and have them linked up for the time being. You can also change the number of map panels. So as we have it here, we've got 3 maps. You can do 2 maps, and we'll just leave it there for now. You can also change the underlying base map. So this has it as kind of a street map, similar to like a Google Maps, but you can also do the aerial, which is like the satellite mapping, to help you see where you are in your community. And if you can't really tell, this fade button will actually fade down our analysis colors, so you can kind of find where you're located. Then when you know where you are, you can fade it back up to where you need it to be. So just to kind of start to take a look at how you might do analysis with this, we can look for a location here using this Find Address button. And I think I'll just do a place name. Let's go down here to just a city or census designated place, and let's just use nearby Woodland as an example here. So we'll take the city of Woodland, and when I click on that, that's just going to highlight the boundaries of the city. And with that, now we can start to see kind of what kind of information is available to us using the mapping tools. Just visually looking at it, you can see the legend is here on the left. Anything that is in yellow, these are census tracts. Any census tract in yellow is the state average, essentially. Anything in light green or dark green represents anything above the state average, and anything in orange or red represents being below the state average. So just on a visual sense here, you can kind of start to see some significant differences in the city. And maybe I'll just remove the boundaries so you can get a clearer sense. But as you can see here, we've got some tracts where people possess a number of resources, but actually the place itself provides very few. And then we also have the opposite, where the place in this census tract has a lot of resources, but the people themselves don't possess a lot. Or here, where both the people and the place have very low resources. So you can start to see, well, what's going on there? Why is that the case? And right now, we're just looking at the index level, but if I were to click on, say, this census tract, what's going to come up is this bar graph. So the center line is, again, going to represent the state average. Anything to the left of that in red is below average, and the actual length of the bar signifies how far below average. And anything to the green and to the right is going to be above average. So for this census tract, just looking at the overall index, you can see that basically everything is below average except for mobility and transportation. If we look on the place side in that same census tract, you get a little bit of a different picture. So again, you see education is quite far below average, but everything else is above or even significantly above here with health and environment. So if we want to drill a little bit deeper and see exactly what's going on there, we can just click on that and say, let's map the health and environment. Let's see why there's such a big difference here. So if I click on that, map that here as well and close that out, then click back into that same census tract, now I'm looking at the indicator level or the domain level to see each of those indicators and to see what's happening. So here you can see that within health, the rate of premature death is actually very high, so it's very below average for the state. Also, the teen birth rate is very high, so that means it's below the average as well. However, infant health is actually a little bit above average. On the place side, you can see air quality is quite good. There's good access to supermarkets, but there's not good access to healthcare facilities, and also prenatal care access is below average. And if we want to get even further, let's say teen birth rate, we can click on that, and that's going to take us all the way down to the birth rate level for teens. And if I click back into that same census tract, now you can see here this is the actual value. And if you're ever not sure what you're looking at, the question mark box here at the bottom will tell you specifically what that map is showing. So here it's the percentage of all births to teens. We're looking in just in this census tract at 11% birth rate versus 6%, so almost double the state average within this census tract. So for youth or adults who are doing this analysis and assessment, that could be a question, why is that the case? Is it related to access to prenatal care? Is that related to access to healthcare availability? Why is there such a high teen birth rate here? And what might be some policy interventions, some public education interventions, some further research questions we have that we might want to utilize to focus on this as clearly an issue in this part of the community, right? So those are just some of the ways that you could start to do this analysis using the maps and start to dig deeper and find out what's happening in your community, which would then lead to further questions, further opportunities for research, and further opportunities for essentially community service or advocacy work. But there's some other features that you can do with that. So let's say we really are interested in this teen birth rate map. We can print it. So if you go to this print map button here, you have the ability to either connect it directly to your email or to social media through Facebook or Twitter. You can also just print it itself, and then you can insert that into a report. You could put that into a PowerPoint. You could print it out and hand it to your school board members or to your city council members. So there's a lot of ways that this could support advocacy. And when I click on that print button, this is what's going to pop up. So you're going to see both the map that you're looking at, you'll get the title of the map and a brief description of what you're looking at. You'll also get the legend, and you'll get the UC Davis stamp, right? So we know that university research certainly has a certain cachet and power associated with it, and we want to make sure that communities can also make use of that when they're doing their advocacy work. So this is the print function and what you can see utilizing that tool. And another thing that I want to highlight is this My ROI function. So this is when I talked about being able to highlight specific geographies and do a separate analysis. This is where you can do that. So if we want to look at not just the census tract, but actually what's going on in the whole city of Woodland, we can do that. So if I go back to cities, designated places, and put Woodland in again, what it's going to do is it's going to basically group all those census tracts together that make up the city boundaries of Woodland. And then if I go to this PDF report and click on that, it's going to recalculate all of the indicators in that area and give us a new average, basically saying, how does all of Woodland compare to the state? And when you open that up, this is the report that you're going to get. So this is now for the entire city of Woodland. What does it look like, both the index level, but also in each of these domains and indicators? So you can see for the whole city, what does education look like? What does employment look like? What does housing look like? Health and the environment. So you can get that full assessment. You can also get the percentages, how they compare to the state with the map, and also a little further, it gives you the demographic breakdowns. So again, this could be a really helpful tool if you are, going to your city representative or your school board, or you're going to your, U.S. Congressperson. You could print out their district information and use that as a tool both to assess what's happening, but also to help inform them and push for changes. So that's really just a brief view of some of the features that we have on the Regional Opportunity Index. I want to show you as well really quickly the Putting Youth on the Map tool, because this is, again, youth specific. Just to show you where the curriculum is, if you go on to the left-hand side, the Learn About side, it's here in Resources under Learn, and we've got the full curriculum, we've got supplementary materials, and also some additional training activities. So I encourage folks to take a look at that. But if we want to take a look at the maps, you'll see again, very similar functionality to the Regional Opportunity Index, same 3-map layout, and similar types of functions. So you can change the base map, you can change how the maps are synced up, you can change the number of maps. It starts out with the Youth Wellbeing Index, the center is the Youth Vulnerability Index, and then finally we have on this side the citizen voting age. So we can also look at youth voting, potential youth power in the community. But let's just take a quick example if we want to just look at the Youth Wellbeing Index, and maybe we'll just highlight here in Sacramento, the school district nearby. And if we just look at Sacramento Unified School District, so this, again, this analysis is using school district boundaries. So if we just click here, we're going to get the overall Youth Wellbeing Index. And what's that going to show us? It's going to show the overall score, again, out of 100 for our district versus the state average. It's also going to show us the breakdowns in each of those domains. So what's that mean for health, education, social relationships, and community involvement? But then you can break that down even further. So here we have the equity analysis with the scale. If you click on that, that's going to give you the additional breakdown both by sex and by race ethnicity. So here you can look at males versus females. You can look at different groups within the school district to see how are they doing overall when it comes to overall well-being. And again, you can break that down even further the same way that we did with the Regional Opportunity Index to say, well, what is the physical fitness level of youth in the school district, males and females, and then race and ethnicity. So you can break it down again even further. You can also print, as we mentioned, you can print the map the same way that you could in Regional Opportunity Index. You can also print each of these graphs. So if you just wanted to take that graph and insert it into a PowerPoint presentation or something, you can literally just print that and utilize that in your advocacy efforts too. And in both the Regional Opportunity Index and Putting Youth on the Map, you can use the kind of map function here. So you can find all of the maps that we have, and you can just expand these and go directly to a map, so you don't have to necessarily click through all of the specific levels. You can find the specific map that you want to look at. And you can also choose different years. So based on the data that we have, you can also look at changes through the years on specific indicators to see how things either are improving or potentially not improving in the community. So that's a really quick overview, I know, of the mapping tools, just to give you a sense of kind of the functionality, how they work, and what's available through them. But again, you know, the curriculum does a number of activities where you can walk both yourself and youth through these. We have some data scavenger hunts where you can actually look for specific information about either your school district or your community while learning about how to use the mapping tools. And we also have some quick tutorial videos on our websites as well that give you really quick, similar to what I did here, functionality breakdown. So, you know, if you need a refresher or you wanted to show it to your young people, you can also use those videos as a means of highlighting how to utilize these tools and what's available through them. So that's just a really quick introduction. Before we jump into some question and answers, I do want to go back to the PowerPoint and just highlight a few ways that groups have been using these tools with young people. So, for example, in Knights Landing, or sorry, not Knights Landing, but with the Helping Hands Active Knights group down in Imperial County at Meadows Union Elementary School, we were supporting a UC CalFresh educator there who was working with a group of young people in a K-8 school to assess food access and also physical activity issues in their community. These young people happened to highlight physical activity as being a real key issue that they wanted to address. They did some photography work and did an assessment of their school to look at essentially the condition of the physical activity equipment, but they also utilized both our mapping tools and other maps that were available to highlight, in addition to a survey that they did of their fellow students, what were the physical activity levels in their community at their school and what were the obesity rates of students at the school. So that, combined with their own testimonies, combined with survey data that they collected from a large number of their peers, made a really compelling argument that they then shared with the administration and the superintendent to say, we need more physical activity equipment. We want to do a stencil project where we're going to paint some activities on the playground for younger students, and they were able to get that. So it was a really big win for them. They're starting up again this school year, looking at other issues that they can focus on, but they really utilized their own research with available data to basically advocate for changes that they wanted to see. Another example was down in Riverside County with the Land Use Planning Awareness Group. So essentially, this was an opportunity to bring youth perspectives to community planning and design. Youth essentially used our mapping tools in conjunction with their own walk audits of the community. So they used that information to then determine and support their involvement in a general plan development for their community in collaboration with the Riverside County Department of Public Health. So just another way where young people are using these tools, but also doing their own research and combining it with their own experience to learn about their community and also to help get involved in a lot of the decision-making that's happening. One last example, we've worked with New American Media and with YouthWire, which essentially are first and largest national collaboration and advocate of 3,000 ethnic news organizations that also support youth media and youth journalism. So in response to some of their requests, we actually trained both their staff, but also youth media teams through the 14 California Building Healthy Communities groups to train youth media and youth journalists to use our data tools as additional assessment when doing their analysis and writing up stories about issues that are important to them in their communities. So one example was down in the Coachella Valley, youth who lived in a community that had very poor transit access. Young people had to walk very far to get to the nearest bus stop, and even then there were no shade structures of protection. And for those of you who know, down in Riverside and Imperial, out in the desert, it's extremely hot, and to be there waiting for a bus with no kind of protection or shade was a real challenge. So in order to highlight this issue and write about it, young people also used our tools looking at transit data and information as another resource. So just another way that young people have essentially used data and maps with their own assessments to push for changes and try and educate others in their community. So with those success stories, I know, again, I've thrown a lot of information at you. I really appreciate your participation in this today and attention to what we've been saying. And I'd love to open it up now with the remaining time that we have for any questions that folks have for the next 10 minutes or so. So thank you, Charles, and maybe we can just facilitate now a discussion with the participants.
Sure, thank you, Brandon. Any questions? So I actually had a quick question, Brandon, and that is having to do with, well, a comment first, which is part of the reason I wanted to have you present to the group was in my work that you referred to, I actually didn't know that you guys have really expanded this a lot more. And in our round 2, definitely we would bring this in as and I do have to say, I like your little triangle. So that bringing it into this future work with the project 4H2O as a process. I like the ROI, and around that, when a question around that would be, when in the curriculum itself that you referred to, do the kids actually, how do you go about it basically? Do you come up with the question first and then map, or how did you do that in terms of guiding these folks?
When it comes to the question as far as like what issue are they interested in focusing on, or?
Right. So because you know what, one of the things that can be overwhelming about data and these maps is, and I know it happens for me, is I go in there and I look and oh my God, I start asking questions about health and it goes on and on and on and on. There's a lot of indicators, and having to pull back and really focus on, let's say if you wanted to look at obesity in Alameda County and how that relates to water, that kind of stuff. I mean, you know what I mean? Like guiding it to a very specific kind of
Definitely.
question.
I mean, so I think, you know, when we really promote a holistic, comprehensive view of these issues, it is important to recognize that they are all interconnected in many ways, and to kind of try and follow that path of, you know, how is obesity potentially related to water access, for example, or how is it related to air quality? But then it also is important to be able to drill down and look at those specific indicators and that specific data. So, you know, sometimes looking at the bigger picture can be helpful when you're kind of starting out and doing your assessments, right? Like when you're having those conversations about what are issues that are important to you. A lot of times we'll actually use hand-drawn maps, and this is an activity that we do in the curriculum early on. You know, having folks just draw out their neighborhood, draw out their community. What are areas that are really meaningful to you as a young person? Where do young people hang out? What are areas that maybe are problematic? What are issues that you recognize in your community? And using that as an initial assessment of just what do youth know? What are their experiences about their community? How do they experience that space? But then you can start to draw out issues from that in the beginning, but then also combining that with looking at, you know, well, there is data available, and how does that maybe match up with some of the things that you all have identified? So you could either look at it from the big picture, but you could also start to look at some of those specific issue areas and say, you know, you all have highlighted this. What have other youth said through these, you know, children of the California Healthy Kids Survey, or what type of data has been collected by the Department of Education that relates to these issues that you're all encountering? So, you know, we kind of start from the bigger picture of just why are data and maps important in the first place? How do they impact our lives? And what can you do in just on your own space in drawings to kind of create your own maps to show your experiences? And then we start to talk about, you know, what kind of resources are available, like our tools that can help guide you into finding out more about your community, but also be used by you as a tool for the changes that you want to see. I don't know if if that helps. explain. But I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot of different points in the process where it's useful. So even if your group is very far along, you know, maybe this is just a way to provide that additional data and information to add some support to their argument, or maybe it's right from the beginning that you utilize it.
Good point. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from the group? Well, it sounds like anybody? If not, I guess we'll just wrap it up. Yes, thank you, Brandon, for taking the time to do this. And I wanted, if I could just share my screen after you finish, but these are the links. And Brandon, will you be sharing your PowerPoint with me so I can upload it to the system?
Sure, yeah, I can get that to you, definitely.
Cool. Thank you very much, Brandon.
No, thank you all. Yeah.
I was just going to say,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I would just say I would love to be in touch with folks. As I mentioned, you know, we are really collaborating closely with UC CalFresh and with 4-H through ANR, and we're definitely trying to build more bridges between those efforts. So it's really wonderful to be connecting with you all this morning and exploring ways that we can try and bring those groups together to really support our young people around the state.
Great. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll hear from you more.
Definitely.
So in wrapping up, I wanted to share with the group that a couple of things. We have the California 4-H Association webinar series coming up. The next two are in November 2nd. We have the Tech Tools by Russ Hill, our own fellow advisor and professional who's going to give us some tips. And the December 7th, we have a recommended Why Don't They Come? Strategies to Increase Latino Participation in Outreach Programs. And with that in mind, if you have any other topics or speaker ideas, please feel free to email it to me. And the last thing is, this whole thing is sponsored by the association membership, and please consider joining. Sign-ups are on right now, and there it is, California 4-H, UCANR, and then CA 4-H member. All righty, with that, have a good rest of the day, everybody. Take care. Thank you again, Brandon.
Thank you.
Thank you.